much. If we could begin, it would be helpful to myself and to our scorers if we could have the members of each team introduce themselves. So if I could have the members of the prosecution team, if you would please state your name and the role that you will be playing tonight.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Albert Jen, prosecution pretrial attorney.
All right, thank you, sir.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Jasmine Criqui for the people.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Benjamin Feng for the people.
Good evening.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Marissa Gaut for the people. At this time, may our witnesses please introduce themselves?
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Grace Kish, and I am Remy Montoya.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Diane Zhou, and I am Officer Max Bird.
Good evening to both of you.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Addie Flanagan, and I am Drew Marshak.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Ava Amen, and I am Dr. Kai Chavez. At this time, may our court clerk please introduce themselves?
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Joshua Yu, and I'll be serving as the court clerk in today's trial. Now at this time, may I introduce the timing rules for the court. I'll be giving both visual and verbal time cues of 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds, as well as a visual and verbal stop. Now with that, may our attorney coaches and teacher advisors please introduce themselves.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Jack Milner, and I'm the teacher advisor for the prosecution.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Robert Trestman. I'm an attorney coach for the prosecution.
Good evening to you.
And good evening, Your Honor. Brandon Saxon, attorney coach for the prosecution.
Good evening to you as well. Does that make up the whole team?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Let's go over to the defense team then, please.
Good evening, Your Honor. I'm Emily Ward, presenting the defense's pretrial motion, and I'm also the witness, Erin Sullivan.
Good evening, Your Honor. I'm Ava Flores, representing my client, Lee Croddy.
Good evening, Your Honor. I'm Jay Perez, and I'll be representing my client, Lee Croddy.
Good evening to you.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Leona Letsos, and I'll be representing my client, Lee Croddy. May our witnesses introduce themselves.
Good evening, Your Honor. I'm Ava Rose Grosley, and I am Zuri O'Neill.
All right.
Good evening, Your Honor. I'm Claire Corrigan, and I am Dr. Jes Beaart.
Good evening to you.
Good evening, Your Honor. I am Taylor Rodriguez, and I will be portraying the role of Lee Croddy. At this time, may our bailiff and unofficial timer please present themselves.
Hello, Your Honor. I'm Rosalinda. I'll be your bailiff this evening.
Good evening to you.
My name is Lauren Hunter.
Sorry, Lauren, but your audio is not coming through.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Still not yet. Let's give her just a moment to see if she can work that out. Maybe we can go on to the next individual for introduction and come back to Lauren as our last. Okay.
I'm sorry.
There you go. Thank you.
My name is Lauren Hunter, and I will be the unofficial timer. May our attorney coaches please introduce themselves?
Good evening, Your Honor. Lisa Stark, attorney coach for the defense team.
Good evening, Your Honor. Jeff Reichert, attorney coach for Team K.
Good evening, Your Honor. David Knudsen, attorney coach, Team K.
Good evening to you. Does that make up the entire team for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Well, I want to welcome you all to tonight. I know you have all been working very hard, coaches, teachers, and participants alike. So congratulations to getting to round 2 of this San Diego County mock court competition. That in and of itself is a feat. I can tell you, being a former litigator myself, and being in the courtroom every day for the past several years, watching other attorneys litigate and put on trials, you can plan on something's not going to go exactly as you had planned for it to go. That's natural. That's going to happen. So I would encourage you to just take it easy, take a deep breath, go slow and steady. I can guarantee you each know this case better than anyone else who's going to be listening to you, whether that's myself or another judge. And that will be true when you're putting on cases in front of juries too. You know what you intended to say. You know exactly how you intended to say it, but none of the rest of us do. So if you forget, just slip right into the next thing that you are going to say. If I ask you a question, just take a moment, collect your thoughts. I'm not going to ask you anything that's intended to purposely disrupt where you're going, just clarifying questions. So have fun tonight, enjoy yourselves. Let's get started. I do want to let you know, well, does the bailiff need to call the case to order before I be giving the instructions on the timing and such?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, if you would please.
All rise. Superior Court of State of California, County of San Diego, Department 1 is now in session. Judge Duffy is presiding.
All right,
Please. Go ahead.
Nope, I didn't. I thought you were maybe done.
Okay. Please make sure to turn off your cameras and mute yourselves. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So each of you, I think you probably know the rules, but I need to let you know that you have to complete your presentations within the specified time limits. The clerk will signal you as your time for each of the section of presentation begins to run out. We saw the 2 minute, 1 minute, 30 second, and time's up. When your total time for each section runs out, you will be stopped, even if you haven't finished. So as I understand it, each attorney has to call all 4 witnesses within the time limit. This is a bench trial. What that means is there's no jury. In the end, I'm going to be rendering a verdict of either guilty or not guilty in relationship to the charges that have been brought. The teams will be rated based on the quality of their presentations tonight, independent of whatever verdict I render. No recesses are going to be called during tonight's trial. If for any reason a brief delay occurs due to some kind of technical snafu, team members should remain in their appropriate places and should have no contact with spectators or with coaches. I need you to remember that the objections are limited to the California mock trial simplified rules of evidence that are located in your case packet. Those are the only objections you can make. And if there are no questions, we will have the pretrial arguments begin.
Your Honor, before we begin, given the amount of people in the Zoom call and the multiple screens to toggle through, I was wondering if it would be okay if my 2 minute, 1 minute, 30 second time warnings be both visual and verbal to ensure that all attorneys are made aware of the time.
That is completely fine with me, sir.
Thank you.
I'm going to instruct that each of you have 4 minutes to present your argument. The defense will begin with their argument. Again, as I mentioned, may interrupt to ask some clarifying questions. The time that you spend answering my questions will not be counted against your 4 minute time limit. At the conclusion of your arguments, each side will be offered 2 minutes of rebuttal. And remember that what rebuttal means is you're countering your opponent's arguments. It's not to raise new issues, okay? So I am going to ask, is our defense counsel ready to summarize their argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, whenever you're ready, ma'am.
Your Honor, the defense moves that the statements given by my client, Lee Croddy, to Officer Byrd be suppressed, since the facts in this case will show that Mr. Croddy's constitutional rights were violated. Lee Croddy had reason to believe he was under custodial interrogation and was not given his Miranda rights. as well as Officer Bird's questioning, was prompting incriminating answers relating to the arrest he had made moments earlier. To start, after Officer Bird arrived at Mr. Croddy's house to arrest Remy Montoya, he asked Lee if he would come down to the station and answer some questions regarding the same arrest. Lee agreed and was put in the back seat of the vehicle. Officer Bird had been dressed in casual clothing, but Officer Bird had identified himself earlier as an officer. The car was unmarked, but was clearly an official police vehicle, as there was a police radio system in plain sight that would even interrupt them during their conversation. When Officer Bird began to ask questions directed at Mr. Croddy's line of work, it was a reasonable response for Lee Croddy to feel he was being interrogated, since not only he was sitting in the back seat of the car, he was being driven by an officer to the police station.
Let me ask you specifically, at what point do you identify that Mr. Croddy was actually placed into custody?
I would say at the point where Officer Bird had accused him of being an anarchist.
Okay. So it's not your position that actually him being asked to come down to the station, him getting in the vehicle, in the back seat of the vehicle. It's not until he's actually in the vehicle and being asked, specifically, as you just said, if he was an.
Yes, and I do think the environment of him being in the back seat, like you would with a criminal who had just been arrested, also plays into this, but it wasn't until he was being called an anarchist that it was him being put into custody.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
In Stansbury v. California, the holding was the subject and undisclosed conclusions of the officers involved generally shouldn't bear any weight in the determination of custody, and that custodial interrogation operates on an objective standard. The determination should be made on based at one point a reasonable person in the suspect's position would believe he or she was in custody at the time. Similar to this case, Lee Croddy was undeniably apprehensive of sharing information with Officer Bird without his lawyer present. From experience in his career using online platforms, he knows that his words can be twisted. The prosecution may look to the case People v. Lewis, which ruled that a casual conversation, even in custodial setting, does not equate to an impermissible interrogation under Miranda, especially if the conversation is voluntary. Our case is distinguished from this case because Lee Croddy did not initiate the conversation and even asked if counsel should be present, and showing clear signs he was not wanting to continue the conversation.
2 minutes.
To continue, Lee Croddy was reasonably suspicious of Officer Bird's questioning regarding his criticisms of the government. Officer Bird prompted the statements from Mr. Croddy, even if not explicitly, by implying that Lee's government criticisms were connected to Remy's actions. Officer Bird even mentions in his witness statement that after arresting—
1 second, ma'am, and ask you a question. Could you point to exactly what it is that Officer Bird asked or stated that was designed to elicit incriminating statements, specifically designed to elicit?
He asked Lee Croddy if that his work could come off that way, implying that it could come off as government criticism and then calling him an anarchist.
Okay, and do you believe that he said anything that was designed to specifically elicit Mr. Croddy's statement that he told Remy to go take those documents?
No, he didn't mention anything towards that, but Officer Bird was aware that Remy Montoya had just been arrested since he made the arrest, and Remy's actions were connected to Lee Croddy's videos that he watched because he was a fan of his videos. So by starting the conversation about his line of work and what he does as a job, which is putting videos online that could be taken as anti-government, was an odd thing for an officer to do who just made the same arrest.
All right, go ahead with your argument, ma'am.
Officer Bird even mentions in his statement that after arresting Remy Montoya, he assumed whoever's in the house was also involved. Lee Croddy came out of the house right after the arrest and was then requested by Officer Bird that he come down to the station to be questioned. On the ride to the station, Bird initiates the conversation by asking about Mr. Croddy's videos and then calling him an anarchist. As any reasonable person would be, Lee Croddy was in an uncomfortable position since Remy Montoya was a fan of his videos and had just been arrested on his property. Lee Croddy even exercised his Fifth Amendment rights by asking, "Do I need to call my lawyer?" which Officer Byrd dismissed and continued on the same topic of conversation. We
All
can
right.
also look to,
I have a question for you. Do you think there's a break in time in between if Officer Byrd did think that Lee Croddy was an individual who Remy may have been working with because she did the head gesture toward the house, as in we have a revolution to fight, that maybe the questions that Officer Byrd asked Lee Croddy in the house as to how he knew Remy Montoya, what she was doing there, etc. Maybe those would have been interrogation questions, but there's a break in time and then we're in the car and it's more of a casual conversation.
I wouldn't say it's casual at all, because if we look at the environment that he's in, he's being placed in the back seat. If it was casual, he would have been put next to Officer Byrd in the passenger seat. And I think that, I'm sorry, I think that distinguishes the difference between the casual conversation and the custodial interrogation that has been taking place.
Okay,
May I continue?
certainly.
We can also look to People v. Boyer, when the defendant has consistently requested to
1
exercise
minute.
his Fifth Amendment rights to silence and counsel, and he was denied. The ruling found that he was in fact under custodial interrogation, resulting in statements being inadmissible. It was Officer Byrd's obligation, a law enforcement officer, to read him his rights, and he failed to do so. Your Honor, my client Lee Croddy was not in a casual setting, and this was not a casual conversation. Officer Byrd was trying to extract information relating to the case while playing it off as casual conversation.
30 seconds.
When in reality, they were intended to elicit response and are a violation of the Constitution and Mr. Lee Croddy's Fifth Amendment rights. This was a custodial interrogation, and for the reasons mentioned, the defense urges this court to exclude Lee Croddy's statements. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And for the prosecution, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, it's the prosecution's position that these statements on page 32, 39, and 40 made by Lee Croddy be allowed in today's trial. Firstly, because it would be a disgrace to multiple historical precedents in cases to label the interaction as a custodial interrogation. And secondly, because of the fact that there was zero accusation and zero elicitation of incrimination. The central issue in this case, as explained on lines 36 through 44 of page 16, is whether or not a custodial interrogation took place in the unmarked police vehicle. But to break it down, there are two components to determining custodial interrogation. Lines 6 through 13 of page 16 breaks it down. First, the circumstances of the interrogation must objectively amount to custody. This means that if a casual conversation is proved, feelings of custody obviously are not warranted. And second, there must be an interrogation where the officer should positively know that their questions could produce incriminating responses. We'll start with Lee Croddy's psychology in making the decision himself to accept a carpool offer, an offer of transportation. Lee Croddy opened the unmarked police car's door, sat himself down, and accepted the offer for a ride to the police station, all of which was under his own volition. In fact,
let me ask you a question. You've got an officer who's just arrested somebody at your home, and then that officer says, "I'd like to ask you some more questions, and I'll give you a ride downtown." Maybe an invitation you can't refuse.
Your Honor, given that the specific question and the specific request was prompting and asking Lee Croddy whether or not he needed a ride to the police station, and combining that and weaving that with the four distinguishing factors of the unmarked police vehicle, these two factors really go to show how casual the entire environment and the entire conversation was. And specifically, those four factors are the casual plain clothes, the plain paint job, the roof of the vehicle devoid of a police siren, and also the interior of the vehicle devoid of the traditional metal cage that should be separating the front seat from the back seat. So given those four distinguishing factors, as well as the actual question of Officer Byrd was asking whether or not Lee Croddy needed a carpool situation to the police station, those two factors weaved together create a non-custodial situation in today's case.
All right, go on, sir.
In fact, the police officer herself is responsible and a dominating reason as to why the casualness of this conversation is so apparent in today's case. The defense has and will continue to champion this single police radio sitting in the front seat as a sort of end-all, environmenting disrupting piece of evidence that proves Lee Croddy felt the constraints of custody. But to this, I direct the court's attention once again to the 4 distinguishing factors. Number 1, Officer Byrd sported his casual plain clothes, devoid of any uniform or badge. Number 2, the vehicle itself sported a plain paint job, one that you could find at your local dealership. And number 3, the roof of the vehicle was devoid of a police siren, the only 3-dimensional distinguishing factor for police vehicles. And number 4, the interior of the vehicle was devoid of the traditional metal cage that is supposed to separate the front seat from the back seat.
Okay, well, notwithstanding, the Officer Byrd identified himself as a police officer by his badge when he arrived at the home. Ms. Montoya had just been arrested, so this is clearly a police officer there on police duty, and the vehicle that he's driving on duty, whether it had lights and bars in it or not, that space inside that vehicle, you are arguing that that's not a coercive environment by the nature of the fact that this individual, after just seeing his friend arrested by a police officer, is now being taken down in a police vehicle?
That's correct, Your Honor, because given the opposing counsel is touting the fact that the police officer identified herself as a police officer to Lee Croddy. But the identification and the admittance of being a police officer has nothing to go to show and suggest a coercive environment. A coercive environment is taking a reasonable person and placing them within that situation. And there are, again, 2 factors that relate and really suggest a coercive environment. That is the 4 distinguishing factors, as well as the backstory behind the entering of the vehicle. The prosecution would like to reiterate that it was a carpool offer, an offer of transportation. Everything from Lee Croddy opening the unmarked police car's door to Lee Croddy sitting himself down and accepting the offer to the ride, all of which was under their own volition. This backstory and explanation to the situation weaved between the 4 distinguishing factors of this unmarked police vehicle creates an uncoercive environment.
All right, sir, why don't you address the second component, the interrogation piece?
Absolutely, Your Honor. Secondly, the defense's burden further requires not only the labeling of the casual conversation as a custodial interrogation, but that the conversation was designed deliberately by Byrd to elicit incriminating evidence from Lee. In Rhode Island v. Innis, the court's analysis admitted that without reasonable elicitation of incriminating evidence, the event cannot be considered an interrogation. And here is that very exact situation in today's case. Because Officer Byrd's grand scheme of just connecting a familiar face to a social media influencer was simply asking Lee about their content being taken from an anarchist perspective. Nothing in the conversation is there any further incriminating evidence or accusation, because insofar as having one's content being taken out of context from an anarchist perspective, that's simply not a crime. Furthermore, facts of pretrial on page 17 solidify the absence of elicitation of incrimination. Officer Byrd specifically stated that she was not talking about Ms. Montoya's actions and that she was speaking generally about Mr. Croddy's content being misinterpreted. The direct quote from Officer Byrd is as follows.
30 seconds.
I was speaking generally that your content can be taken out of context. That distinguishment from the case packet is what makes the lack of an accusation very clear.
All right, final question for you. So even if the court were to find that Croddy was in custody, it's your argument that notwithstanding there was not an interrogation. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct because of the landmark case People v. Lewis. In fact, People v. Lewis is a safety net for the prosecution because even if the situation did amount to custody, People v. Lewis dictates that not requiring Miranda warnings still applies to casual conversations, even if the defendant was in a custodial setting. If the court's analysis admits this, which it did, there is no question to the admissibility of today's case, given that the setting was far from custodial in an unmarked police car during an offer to carpool. Even further, opposing counsel during questioning brings up the fact of initiation of conversation and who came first in initiating that conversation. But in People v. Lewis, its holding never touches upon and never talks about the initiation of conversation. Its holding does not set up specific conditions or hoops to jump through, such as like in Stansbury v. California, where the defendant must be a suspect of the case. The declaration is very simple and does not require specific conditions. Not requiring Miranda warnings still applies to casual conversations, even if the defendant was in a custodial setting.
Okay, thank you, sir. Do I have any rebuttal from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, whenever you're ready, ma'am.
In this situation, prosecution says that the car was unmarked and therefore in his clothing was casual, so there it's casual. But I think that because he distinguished himself as an officer and was driving the car to a police station, his police car, even if unmarked, it's a very uncomfortable situation for Lee. He was not in control of the car and therefore not in control of the situation. And in People v. Lewis, the defendant had asserted his comments in. Lee did not assert his comments. He was responding and defending himself against the comments that Officer Byrd was insisting about him being an anarchist YouTuber. That's all, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much. And is there any rebuttal from the prosecution?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution would like to address the argument from opposing counsel about sitting in the back seat. It should be understood that sitting in the back seat does not translate to a custodial environment. The reasoning opposing counsel champions is invalid when you consider the multiple rideshare apps like Uber and Lyft and even taxis that have the same sitting position, that have the same seating charts, with an individual being driven whilst sitting in the back without an isolation cage of a typical police car. Those situations in those rideshare apps and taxis are not custodial by any means, yet they have the same seating chart. And secondly, the case People v. Boyer, which opposing counsel pedestals their argument on, does not apply to the case at hand for 3 reasons. First, in People v. Boyer, the detectives failed to honor the defendant's consistent and explicit request for an attorney. Comparatively, all Lee did was ask if he needed a lawyer, which is completely different and does not amount to an assertion of his Miranda rights. And second, in People v. Boyer, the defendant was interrogated as a clear and labeled suspect. Comparatively, the suspect in today's case is a whole different human being, which is Remy Montoya, who had already been arrested as the suspect. And lastly, and most notably, in People v. Boyer, the defendant, was questioned in a physical police station that requires physical entry, during which a reasonable person would see numerous other police at work, a sign, actual police cars that do not blend in with the rest of society's vehicles, and overall, an environment that very clearly shouts, you are in police territory and custody as a suspect. Now, with the recognition of a casual conversation and the absence of eliciting incrimination, the prosecution respectfully requests that you admit the statements made by Lee Croddy during their casual conversation with Officer Byrd in today's trial. Thank you.
All right, thank you both very much. Before I rule on the motion, the team members may confer with their attorney and teacher coaches regarding any trial irregularities. If you'd like to do so, please do so now. I'll allow 60 seconds for that.
Thirty seconds remaining. Stop.
All right, thank you. Does either team have any irregularities that you would like to report? Let me start first with the defense.
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. The prosecution?
No irregularities, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much. With that, then, I am going to rule on the pretrial motion, and the court is going to deny the defense request to suppress this statement. The court does not find the karate statement to be a custodial interrogation, and therefore the statement was not in violation, it was nothing that was done in violation of Lee Croddy's Fifth Amendment right. So the conversation will be admissible. All right, now let me read the charges and then we will move into our opening statements. The people of the state of California are charging the defendant, Lee Croddy, in 2 counts. Count 1, aiding and abetting a first-degree burglary committed by Remy Montoya, and count 2, as an accessory after the fact to a felony committed by Remy Montoya. Prosecution, are you ready with your opening statement, sir?
Before we begin, Your Honor, the prosecution would like to address a few preliminary matters.
Certainly.
The prosecution moves to pre-mark exhibits A, B, and C for identification. The prosecution requests that the image of Drew Marshak's briefcase be marked as exhibit A.
All right.
Prosecution requests that the February 12th group chat be marked as exhibit B. And the prosecution requests that the February 14th WhatsApp conversation between Lee Croddy and Remy Montoya be marked as exhibit C.
All right, thank you. So marked. All right, is the prosecution ready to proceed with opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, whenever you're ready, ma'am.
Your Honor, my name is Jasmine Criqui, the prosecutor representing the state of California in this action. One young vulnerable fan, one innocent victim. As you hear this case today, know that the fateful meeting between these two was not orchestrated by fate, but by a puppet master, an expert manipulator who used their celebrity status to advance their own agenda. On February 15th, Drew Marshak's home was broken into, her property was taken from her, and her sense of privacy and security was shattered. No one in this courtroom today disputes the injustice of this incident. However, it would be a gross oversimplification of the case before us to only consider the events of February 15th in order to assign guilt, when in reality, February 15th's injustice was the culmination of a months-long effort by the defendant to emotionally manipulate Remy Montoya, one of the defendant's most devoted fans, into committing the crime that the defendant didn't want on his hands. Calcrim 400 and 401 explain that the defendant has aided and abetted a burglary if they knew that the perpetrator intended to commit a burglary and consciously helped them to do so. Furthermore, Calcrim 440 identifies the defendant as an accessory to the crime if they knew that the perpetrator had committed the crime and still acted in order for the perpetrator to avoid arrest. In both cases, it is abundantly clear that the defendant did just that. Today, Ms. Montoya herself will shed light on how the defendant took advantage of her adoration of him by singling her out specifically, despite the presence of multiple other fans of the defendants in Beacon Hills at the time of the incident, and by puppeteering her into believing that the defendant's career was dependent on the documents, and by extension, Ms. Montoya. Furthermore, Drew Marshak will testify to the harm she suffered as a result of the defendant's machinations, to the distinctive nature of her briefcase, and to Ms. Montoya's addled state at the time of the incident. Then, Officer Max Bird will lay out the defendant's franticness upon Montoya's arrest and their knowledge of Ms. Montoya's wrongdoing. Finally, the prosecution will prove that not only did Lee Croddy have full knowledge as to the lengths Ms. Montoya was willing to go to please him, but that he methodically and purposefully perpetuated her adoration in an online setting through the use of groupthink, a manipulative practice that Dr. Kai Chavez will walk us through. Not only did the puppet master give Ms. Montoya all of the information and motivation she needed to commit this heinous crime, but he harbored her after the fact until a neighbor alerted the police of her presence in his home. By the conclusion of this trial, myself and my co-counsel, Marissa Gaut and Benjamin Feng, will have proved beyond all reasonable doubt that the defendant, Lee Croddy, is guilty of aiding and abetting a first-degree burglary as well as accessory after the fact. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Defense counsel, are you ready to proceed with your opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, whenever you're ready, ma'am.
Your Honor, what started as a snowball has now turned into an avalanche. Today, we're here to discuss the story of a hyperbole that became a reality. After hearing YouTube personality Lee Croddy exclaiming passionately to his viewers that they must further explore and examine the existence of aliens, superfan Remy Montoya took this literally. When Lee Croddy has gone to his online group chats about some information that he had discovered, Remy Montoya went absolutely rogue. In doing so, she had broken into the house of a government agent of the name Drew Marshak in search of any additional evidence and had assaulted her. Good afternoon, Your Honor. I'm Ava Flores, and I'll be representing the accused Lee Croddy on this case. Although some argue that my client had incentivized and encouraged these actions of Remy Montoya, we must realize and look at the facts and understand that Remy Montoya had acted entirely independently. As a crazed fan, she would do anything it takes to gain the attention or the approval of her idol, and she had lost all common sense to try and make this happen. Out of desperation to pin the blame on someone else, she tries to make it seem like it is my client's fault. Today, we will be calling Erin Sullivan, Zuri O'Neill, Dr. Jes Beaart, and Lee Croddy as witnesses to testify the truth within this reality. First, we will be calling Erin Sullivan, Lee Croddy's agent, who will be testifying to Lee's true character as she works with him daily, and reassuring that Lee Croddy is not guilty and would never want anyone to commit such a heinous crime. She will explain that the group chat was a mere business tactic to engage more with fans and achieve more support for Lee Croddy's videos. Further, she will clarify exactly what had happened at the meet and greet between Lee Croddy and Remy Montoya. Then we will call Zuri O'Neill, a member of the group chat in which many of the conversations took place, explaining that the group chat was merely a safe space for everyone to passionately vent about what they had cared about, conspiracy theories. She mentions how it truly is a place for harmless banter with no ill intention whatsoever. Also, she had attended the meet and greet, and it was clear to her that Remy Montoya was in a manic state and Lee Croddy was being a caring individual, offering his emotional support. In addition to these witnesses, we will be calling Dr. Jes Beaart, a sociology expert who will be explaining the effects that social media has on an individual, especially a superfan like Remy Montoya. Lastly, Lee Croddy will be telling you exactly why he is not guilty of these charges. He will clarify his relationship with Remy Montoya, assuring that she was just a fan that he interacted with occasionally online, not a partner in crime. The prosecution attempts to paint this narrative that Lee Croddy was harboring a fugitive, when in reality, Mr. Croddy has always had a lot of care and gratitude in his heart towards his fans. Of course, he's going to try to calm down and relax someone, especially a fan, who appears to be in such a frantic and poor mental state. Doesn't that just seem like the right thing to do? Today, you must not look to the prosecution as they will try to paint an innocent man as guilty. This is simply the story of a crazed fangirl who tries to bring her idol down with her in the pit of her own downfall. When looking at the facts, evidence, and witness statements, it is clear that my client's words were a mere snowball that had rolled into an avalanche. Therefore, we must find Mr. Croddy to be not guilty of participating in aiding and abetting a first-degree burglary and accessory after the fact. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Is the prosecution ready to call its first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Remy Montoya to the stand.
All right.
So who was it?
Remy Montoya.
Reverend Montoya, may you please raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of mock trial competition?
I do.
Please say your name and spell your last for the record.
Remy Montoya, Montoya.
Good evening, Ms. Montoya. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Good evening. My name is Remy Montoya. I'm 21 years old, a sales associate at Thinker Toys Corporation, and a proud student at Beacon Hills Community College. Just looking to minimize some student debt. You know how it is.
Thank you. So, how did you first become acquainted with Lee Croddy?
I first found one of Lee's videos back in November 2018 while researching the Roswell UFO crash of 1947. It was out of this world. I mean, I immediately fell in love with all of Lee's content and followed all of his socials.
And was your only connection to Croddy through watching her videos?
That's how it started, but later in, I think, March, I received a private invitation from Lee to join a private group chat with around 6 other members. I was pretty excited. I was beginning to feel more of a friend of Lee's than just a fan.
And was this the only direct interaction you had with her?
Not in the slightest. Later in July, I was stoked because my name was picked to go to a panel and a lunch held by Lee. We've also communicated through chats, messages, likes, and comments, such as the chat on February 12th.
Could you briefly walk us through the events on February 12th, 2020?
Of course. The day before, Lee had tweeted about an exciting upcoming video regarding government secrets. The next day, Lee sent our group chat a sneak peek of the video, along with some messages saying things such as mobilizing, demanding answers, taking what is ours. I remember Lee saying that he would march up to Drew Marshak himself and demand answers.
What do you know about this Drew Marshak?
Drew Marshak is the name of the government official whose name and address was in the sneak peek video.
And was there anything particularly important from the full video?
Once it was released, there was sort of this direct call to action from Lee to us group chat members. I remember Lee saying to get down to where that official lives if necessary and to demand answers.
Objection, hearsay.
Your Honor, may be heard.
You may, sir.
Your Honor, this statement is simply made to show Lee Croddy's state of mind when making the statement and is not offered for the truth of the matter.
The objection is overruled. Go ahead, continue.
Ms. Montoya, may I continue?
Of course.
So what do you mean a direct call?
Well, I felt it was a direct call because, to my knowledge, not every viewer had access to the sneak peek video with the address. How are they supposed to confront Mrs. Marshak, as Lee suggested, without that?
And was there anything particularly important that happened the day after Lee posted the full video?
Yes. Lee messaged me asking if I was in the Beacon Hills area. I was, so I messaged him back confirming.
And how did Lee respond?
Because Lee wasn't in the area himself, he insisted on me getting into Mrs. Marshak's house.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may, sir.
Ms. Montoya, do you have Exhibit C?
I do.
Do you recognize Exhibit C?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a WhatsApp conversation between Lee and I on February 14th.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of your text conversation?
It is.
Your Honor, I'm currently moving what has been previously marked as Exhibit C into evidence.
Any objection?
None.
All right, it will be admitted.
Thank you. Ms. Montoya, do you mind reading lines 29 through 31?
Of course. I know you do, but we need those documents, Remy. You really need to get into that house tomorrow.
Ms. Montoya, after Lee sent you that, what happened next?
I did what I was asked to do. On February 15th, I broke into Mrs. Marshak's house, took information off of her computer, and took her briefcase. She tried to take the briefcase back, and in my panic, I punched her in the face and then ran to the house as quickly as possible.
What did you do after?
Well, I was completely overwhelmed because I had just punched Mrs. Marshak, and it was never my intention to hurt anybody. So I thought the best thing to do would go to find Lee and ask for help.
And once you got there, what did you say to them?
I tried telling Lee as much information about our situation as possible, and I specifically remember telling him that I had gotten the documents he needed from the house, that I had a run-in with Marshak.
And how are you able to eventually overcome your state of panic?
I didn't do it all by myself. Lee offered me a ride back to his place and assured me that no problem was too big to be solved, which was relieving.
Ms. Montoya, what, if anything, happened on the car ride?
In my frustration, I shouted something about all my problems being because of the stupid briefcase. Lee asked if it was just a prop and I got angry. Because why would I be freaking out so much over something as little as a prop?
And what did they do after you were brought into their house?
Lee led me through the back entrance of his house, and after asking for a place to stay until I wasn't being followed anymore, Lee showed absolutely no hesitation and immediately showed me a place to rest.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination, please.
It's true that you've pled guilty to criminal charges.
Yes.
It's also true that you're currently awaiting sentencing.
Yes.
You took great pride in being one of Lee's greatest fans.
I was a devout follower. That's why Lee chose me to finish his plan. But yes, I did. I was a...
Could you please answer in a yes or no fashion?
Yes.
Were you all alone when you broke into Mr. Marshak's home?
I was.
And you transferred a federal agent's private data onto your USB.
Yes, that's correct.
And it was just you that had left Mr. Marshak on the kitchen floor, bleeding out of his head.
Well, Lee asked me to get into the house and told me to demand answers.
Objection, the witness is being non-responsive.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
You may, sir.
Your Honor, the question that my opposing counsel asked is very loaded and requires way more context than just a yes or no answer. My witness is simply providing the context that's needed to sufficiently answer the question.
All right, that objection is going to be overruled. Go ahead and re-ask your question, ma'am, and we'll go from there.
Sure. It was just you that left Mr. Marshak bleeding out of his head on the kitchen floor.
Once again, after Lee asked me to get into the house and told me to take what is ours, it was me who left Mrs. Marshak on the floor.
And after the assault, you fled the scene.
That is correct, to find Lee and ask for help.
And you never formally told Lee what you had done to Agent Marshak.
I told him that I had a run-in with Marshak and that I had gotten the documents needed from the house, but no, I never specifically told him.
And it's true that Mr. Croddy had said, is that a prop or something to you after you had shown him the briefcase?
The briefcase had a government official. Wait, I'm sorry, were you finished?
I was finished, yeah.
The briefcase had a government official, and I wouldn't be freaking out as much as I was over something as silly as a prop, but that is correct.
And it's true that you were under the impression that you would be sleeping in Lee's private bunker.
I thought it was a possibility that he was leading me there, but I wasn't sure.
You actually just slept in Lee's guest bedroom.
That is true, after Lee offered.
And the police arrested you, not Mr. Croddy, the day after your attack on Mr. Marshak.
That is correct.
And it's true that there are 5 people in that group chat where the address was disclosed.
Lee chose me out of all of them to finish his plan, but it's correct.
I apologize. Isn't it true that out of the 5 people involved in that group chat, it was only you that has ever taken violent action?
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation.
Sustained.
May I respond?
No, the objection is sustained. Please move on.
Okay. That would be my final question. Thank you, Mr. Montoya.
All right, thank you. Any redirect?
Mrs. Montoya.
Briefly, Your Honor. Ms. Montoya, what have you agreed to do for today's trial?
Today, I am here to simply offer truthful testimony for the case at hand.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Please call your next witness.
At this time, the prosecution calls Officer Max Bird to the stand.
Officer Max Bird, can you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts, rules, and match-out competition?
I do.
Please say your name, spell your last for the record.
Max Bird, B-I-R-D.
Good evening, Officer Bird.
Good evening, ma'am.
Could you tell us a little bit about your credentials?
Of course, ma'am. I am an officer with the Beacon County Sheriff's Station in Beacon County, California. I've been working there for about a decade now, which does qualify me as a veteran. Although I have to say, all those donuts at the station are starting to catch up with me.
Next, could you tell us how you got involved with today's case?
Yes, ma'am. The station received a call at 3:12 p.m. from Drew Marshak saying she had been robbed. I immediately rushed to the scene.
And what did you see when you arrived?
I saw Mrs. Marshak in a daze and with multiple wounds. She had a wound to the face and a large gash on her forehead.
What, if any, information were you given about the robbery?
She gave me a physical description of the perpetrator and also informed me that the perpetrator stole her briefcase, which contained confidential government information.
What were your next steps in the case?
The station sent out an APB with a sketch of the perpetrator. The next morning, we received a tip from someone who claimed to recognize the suspect, which prompted me to go to the defendant's house.
And what did you see when you got to the scene?
When I arrived at the scene, I saw someone who matched the sketch pacing across the yard. She identified herself as Remy Montoya, and I placed her under arrest.
What, if anything, did she say to you?
Ma'am, she was frantically saying to join a revolution against the government and to join us as she nodded towards the house.
And was anybody in this house?
Someone who was later identified as Lee Croddy came out of his house and nervously started asking what Montoya did and took.
What, if anything else, did the defendant tell you?
The defendant told me that Montoya was one of his fans and claimed that Montoya seemed nervous at an event held the night before. So the defendant invited Montoya to his house for the night.
What action did you take after that?
I asked the defendant to accompany me back to the station in my vehicle for further questioning.
And what happened on the way to the station?
Ma'am, I tried to have a casual conversation with Mr. Croddy, who seemed very defensive and claimed that he was not very close with Montoya.
What else did the defendant say?
The defendant revealed to me that he was the person who told Montoya to get the documents.
Let's move on to the events of later that day. What steps did you take when you arrived at the station?
I wanted to conduct an interview with the defendant, but he refused to talk until his lawyer came to the station.
And what interactions did the station have with Remy?
I questioned Montoya, and she revealed that the defendant was the one who provided her with Mrs. Marshak's address and instructed her to get into Marshak's house and steal the papers.
What were your final actions in the case?
I considered Mr. Croddy a suspect and soon conducted interviews with both Zuri O'Neill and Erin Sullivan. After gathering all this information, I arrested the defendant and charged him with aiding and abetting in first-degree burglary and accessory after the fact.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right, cross-examination.
Yes. Good evening, Ms. Bird.
Good evening, ma'am.
So you're an officer at Beacon County, correct?
That's correct, ma'am.
And on February 15th, you got a call from Marshak about being robbed and assaulted?
Objection, Your Honor. This is a compound question.
Okay, let me restate it.
Go ahead, ma'am.
So on February 15th, you found out Marshak was robbed and assaulted?
That's also correct, ma'am.
Objection, Your Honor. This is still a compound question.
All right. The objection is sustained. Ms. Perez, if you could direct first towards robbed and then towards assaulted. Go ahead.
Okay. So on February 15th, you got a call from Marshak from being robbed, correct?
That's correct, ma'am.
And also assaulted?
That is also correct, ma'am.
And when you got to Mr. Marshak, he was injured, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Mrs. Marshak was very much injured and in a daze.
And later was told a girl stole Marshak's briefcase.
That's correct, ma'am. Mrs. Marshak gave me a description of the perpetrator.
And you found Remy's description from security tapes Mr. Marshak owned.
That's also correct. Mrs. Marshak directed us to the security tapes that she had, which caught Miss Montoya's photo.
Then found Remy's, so Officer Bird, would you say you did a thorough investigation on February 15th?
Yes, I would say so, ma'am. I continued my investigation after the 15th, but yes, I did.
But you found no evidence of Lee Croddy ever having been at Agent Marshak's house, correct?
That's correct, because the defendant never went to Mrs. Marshak's house.
Is that a yes or a no?
That's a yes, ma'am.
Only evidence on Remy Montoya, correct?
That's correct, but ma'am, the defendant is not being charged
Is
for
that a
the
yes
assault.
or a no?
That's a yes, ma'am.
And on February 16th, you knew Remy's whereabouts from a tip.
That's correct, ma'am.
And when you arrived at where the tip said Remy would be, Remy was pacing, correct?
That's correct, ma'am.
Although you went to Lee Croddy's residence to arrest Remy Montoya, it wasn't to arrest my client, correct?
Not on that initial date. That's correct, ma'am.
Is that a yes or no?
That's a yes, ma'am.
It was only to find Mr. Montoya.
That's correct. I was there to arrest Miss Montoya, ma'am.
Sorry. And isn't it true when my client saw you at his house, he was surprised and said, "What did Remy do?"
That's correct, ma'am. The defendant also asked me what Montoya took.
Now moving on, you took Lee Croddy to the police station for a statement, correct?
Yes, I asked him to accompany me and he agreed.
And while on your way in the car, you called my client Lee Croddy an anarchist, didn't you?
Ma'am, I was only trying to make small talk, but yes, that's correct.
So you had already made up your mind about my client being guilty for the crime, hadn't you?
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Overruled. Just asking a personal question as to what the detective had made up his mind about.
That's incorrect, ma'am. I did not suspect the defendant of anything at the time. The word anarchist I used was simply how I interpreted his channel.
Okay, that will be all.
All right, thank you very much. Is there any redirect of this witness?
None, Your Honor. May this witness please be excused?
Yes, ma'am, you may be excused. All right, the next witness, please.
The prosecution calls Drew Marshak to the stand.
Drew Marshak, can you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the trial competition?
I do.
Please state your name, spell the last for the record.
Drew Marshak, Marshak.
Whenever you're ready, ma'am.
Good evening, Ms. Marshak. Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yes, I am Drew Marshak. I'm 42 years old, and I've been an investigator with the California State Department of Justice's Bureau of Investigation for over 15 years now.
And can you briefly explain what your work at the Bureau entails?
In general, it involves the collection and analysis of time-sensitive material. Much of my work involves confidential matters, therefore, I cannot disclose much of the information.
I'm now going to ask you some questions about the events that took place on February 15th. What did you do on the afternoon of February 15th?
Well, I drove up to my house around 3 o'clock after coming back from the grocery store. After parking in the driveway, I noticed that the side gate was slightly open.
What was your reaction to noticing that?
I wasn't too worried because I occasionally leave it unlocked for my gardener, and I honestly couldn't remember if I had left it open or not. So I just walked through the front door like I normally do.
And what happened after you entered your home?
When I walked in the front door, I saw that there were faint, muddy footprints on the floor inside. When I stepped into the entryway, I saw someone who was later identified as Remy Montoya turn the corner from my sitting room and into the entryway.
How did you react to seeing Miss Montoya in your home?
I tried to stop Remy, but she punched me in the face. I lost my balance backwards, and the head collided with the edge of a small table.
And how did you feel after hitting your head?
I felt slightly dizzy, but I clearly remember her standing over me, holding my state-issued briefcase.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Ms. Marshak, do you have Exhibit A on hand?
Yes, I do.
Marshak, do you recognize the object shown in this exhibit?
Yes, that's my state-issued briefcase. It's engraved with my first initial, my full last name, and my work insignia. I'd know it anywhere.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of your briefcase?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, permission to move the briefcase into evidence as Exhibit A?
Any objection?
None.
All right, the briefcase will be admitted. Exhibit A.
Ms. Marshak, are you at liberty to discuss the contents of this briefcase?
Because of the nature of my job, I am obligated to keep the material confidential. However, I can confirm that there were documents containing sensitive government matters.
And what, if anything, did you hear Ms. Montoya say while standing over you holding this briefcase?
Remy was muttering audibly and cursing. I remember her saying, "Oh no, what have I done? What am I doing?" She also muttered, "Lee is not going to like this, and at least we got the proof we needed."
Objection, hearsay.
Your Honor, may be heard.
You may.
This response falls under the hearsay exception state of mind, specifically with regard to showing Remy Montoya's motive.
The objection is going to be sustained. Go ahead, continue.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Marshak. No further questions.
All right, is there any redirect? I'm
I have
sorry.
a cross-examination.
I'm sorry. I was lost my place. Cross-examination. Thank you very much.
Okay. You're an investigator with the California State Department of Justice's Bureau of Investigation for over 15 years, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you deal with information that contains confidential matters which you cannot disclose to Joe Average.
Yes, that is true.
And you figured something was not right when your side gate had been left open.
Objection, Your Honor, not a question.
Sustained.
When you entered your house, you noticed a singular pair of muddy footprints that led you to what you now know as Remy Montoya.
Objection.
Yes, that is true.
Hang on one
Question.
second, please. Your objection, ma'am?
Objection, Your Honor, that was still not a question.
All right, please phrase anything.
I can rephrase.
Ask any question. Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead.
It's a fact that when you entered your house, you noticed a singular pair of muddy footprints that led you to what you now know as Remy Montoya.
Yes, that is true.
Just to clarify, Remy Montoya was the only person that you saw in your house.
Objection, Your Honor, not a question.
Sustained.
And it's true that when you saw Remy Montoya, you were punched in the face.
Objection, Your Honor, not a question.
I will read that as, isn't it true? But ma'am, you need to ask questions, not make statements, okay? So if you'll phrase anything that you'd like to ask of the detective in question. Thank you.
Should I rephrase my last question?
You may.
When you saw Remy Montoya, it is correct that he punched you in the face.
Yes, that is true.
And you ended up, after this, you ended up hitting your forehead on the hard edge of the table. Is this what happened?
Yes, I lost my balance and I fell, and the edge of the table impacted my head.
Along with assaulting you, Remy also took your confidential information via his USB. Is this what happened?
Yes, they took my state-issued briefcase.
And that night, you had not seen my client, Mr. Croddy. Is this true?
No, only Remy Montoya, who had entered my home.
And this is actually your first time ever seeing my client, Mr. Croddy, in person.
I did
Object-
not see Mr. Croddy. I saw Remy Montoya.
Thank you. That'll be all.
All right, thank you. Any redirect?
No, Your Honor. May this witness be excused?
This witness may be excused. Please call the next witness.
At this time, the prosecution calls Dr. Kai Chavez to the stand.
All right, thank you.
Dr. Kai Chavez, can you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the Matcha competition?
I do.
Please state your name and spell your last for the record.
Kai Chavez, Chavez.
Good evening, Dr. Chavez.
Good evening.
Let's begin with your qualifications. Could you tell us a bit about your education?
Sure. In 2004, I earned my bachelor's degree studying psychology at the University of South Hudson, and then went on to pursue a master's degree in 2011 with 3 years of residency.
And what kind of work do you do now?
In my private practice, I prescribe medication and provide psychotherapy to patients with various psychiatric illnesses. I have also served as an expert witness in about 150 cases.
What fields of psychology do you specialize in?
I research mental illnesses that affect mood and personality in extreme and inflexible ways.
2 minutes.
I have also done extensive research on the psychological phenomena of groupthink.
Now let's move on to your assessment of today's case. To start, could you describe the concept of groupthink?
Of course, groupthink occurs when certain groups value conformity, limiting individual decision-making. This creates an environment that can lead to disastrous consequences.
And can you explain how groupthink translates to an online environment?
The online setting often amplifies groupthink's negative effects. This often occurs in fan bases of online personalities, like the defendant. Fans are more likely to cyberbully or dox somebody who the online celebrity portrays in a negative light. Though these fans are acting individually, their behavior is a result of the groupthink environment created by the internet celebrity.
How does groupthink apply to the case at hand?
In the group chat,
1 minute.
it's clear that the toxic environment the defendant established directly influenced the fans' individual behavior.
And could you please explain how the defendant contributed to the creation of a dangerous environment?
The defendant went on long, angry rants on their YouTube channel and spoke out against the government, promoting a hostile environment for their fans. This, combined with the direct calls to action against Drew Marshak in the group chats, created a
30
groupthink
seconds.
setting that prevented individual decision-making.
Dr. Chavez, in your professional opinion, what role did the defendant play in Remy's actions?
In my professional opinion, the defendant's establishment of a toxic environment that encouraged criminal behavior makes him a puppet master who is responsible for Remy's actions.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
All right, Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Please state your name.
I'm Dr. Kai Chavez.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Your Honor. I'm going to be asking Dr. Kai Chavez some questions. You've made the very bold assumption that Lee Croddy created a groupthink environment, but you've never met Lee Croddy, have you?
No, I have not, but I have been familiarized with his interactions with others through the evidence in the group chats and individual text messages.
In your groupthink examples from the past, multiple people were affected, weren't they?
Yes, that's true, and that's sort of the nature of groupthink.
2 minutes.
Yet within this case that you've classified as groupthink, there were no other individuals that had committed this particular offense, correct?
No, but groupthink is also known to embolden individual feelings and thoughts.
Therefore, Doctor, it is not plausible to say that an entire group was affected when only one person committed this crime, is it?
No, they could all be affected by groupthink, although Remy definitely showed it in a different way.
Dr. Kai Chavez, is it the fault of the celebrity for the idolization from others of themselves?
No, it is not.
From examined evidence within the case, did the defendant ever mention assault or harming anyone?
Not directly, but they definitely did encourage aggressive behavior.
Is that a yes or a no?
That's a no.
Thank you. In your statement on lines 39 through 42, you state that direct calls of action are not toxic, correct?
Not inherently, unless they encourage behavior that is generally seen as bad, such as criminal behavior.
Yet for a groupthink environment to occur, the environment itself must be toxic?
Yes, that's true.
1 minute.
Thank you. Dr. Kai Chavez, do you believe that every individual has the capability to think for themselves?
They generally do, although if you're talking about this specific situation, their individual feelings are definitely prevented and suppressed.
From your work, you understand the complexity of how individuals are capable of their own decisions, correct?
Yes, that's true.
Since all of these conversations took place online, is it possible for someone to leave the group chat or simply turn off their phone if they feel uncomfortable?
30 seconds.
Yes, it is.
Therefore, even with toxic environments from the internet, every person has their own ability to make rational decisions in this environment, correct?
Yes, though, as I said, groupthink definitely controls someone's behavior sometimes.
Thank you, Dr. Kai Chavez. That will be all, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much. That's the prosecution's last witness, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the prosecution rests.
All right, thank you. Is the defense ready to proceed? If so, they may call their first witness.
Yes, Your Honor, we would like to call Erin Sullivan to the stand.
All right.
Erin Sullivan, can you please raise your hand? Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully and conform to the facts ruled in mock trial competition? Please state your name and spell your last for the record.
Erin Sullivan, Sullivan.
Good evening, Ms. Sullivan.
Good evening.
Do you know Mr. Lee Croddy?
I do. Lee Croddy, I'm his agent, so we've worked together for a couple of years now. So we're pretty close.
How do you know Lee Croddy?
Well, like I said, we've worked together for a couple of years now, and I do like the business and, take care of a lot of things for him.
What issues does Lee Croddy discuss in his video?
Well, in his videos, he discusses, government topics that he thinks they need to be shared with the public.
How long has Lee been dealing with his fans?
He's been dealing with fans since his career started online, so.
Do you know anything about Lee's group chats?
Yes, so his following started to slow down, and so we decided to make these group chats to get the fans more involved, and it really worked.
What do these group chats do?
These group chats are made so that the fans feel more connected to the mystery, and he can share his ideas with them and they can discuss.
From your knowledge, has Lee ever asked any of his fans to engage in anything illegal?
No, he would never do that. He cares for his fans.
And from what you know, Lee Croddy has any of his fans gotten violent?
No.
Do you remember meeting a fan called Remy Montoya?
Yes. Remy was a super fan of the channel, and to my knowledge, was in the group chats, one of the Twitter ones, and he came to Lee's meet and greets multiple times.
When did you first meet Remy?
I saw Remy at the most recent meet and greet. But he, I'm aware that he was very intertwined with Lee on social media.
What was your first impression of Remy at the most recent meet and greet?
Well, Remy was, Lee has a lot of fans, and Remy came up to Lee and they kind of embraced each other. And my first impression was they might know each other. But Lee is always kind to his fans, so I didn't think that much about it. But Remy, on the other hand, was acting a little bit odd, and Lee asked me to just watch over him.
In your opinion, what kind of person is Lee Croddy?
Well, for the past 3 years that I've worked with him, he's always been good and a very good client, and I've always thought of him as caring.
That will be all, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Sullivan, as an agent, your reputation in your field is directly tied to the success of your clients, correct?
Yes.
And similarly, your financial livelihood is also directly tied to the success of your clients, correct?
Yes.
And Lee Croddy is a very prominent client of yours, is that right?
He is.
And therefore, it's reasonable to assume that the outcome of this court case could have a significant impact on your career, is that right?
Well, if you're talking about his career being stopped and we losing income, I think that's incorrect because from this, it's the attention we've gotten from this case, I think could be more, beneficial than any meet and greet.
Moving on, Ms. Sullivan, you've observed the defendant's different interactions with many of their fans, right?
That is correct.
And amongst all of these interactions, the defendant's conversation with Remy Montoya at the February 15th meet and greet stood out to you as unique, right?
Yes, it seemed like they knew each other.
From their various actions, such as the embrace they shared, you assume the defendant knew Remy quite well, right?
That is correct.
In fact, you even recalled him referring to Remy as a friend when he asked you to keep an eye on her, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right, on redirect, anything?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much. Next witness, please.
The defense calls Zuri O'Neill to the stand.
All right, thank you.
Zuri O'Neill, can you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly affirm this testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts, rules, and law trial competition? Please spell your last name and say your full name for the record.
O'Neill. O-N-E-I-L-L.
Could you please state your name?
Zuri O'Neill.
I'm going to start off by asking for some background information first. Please tell the court of how you know the defendant, Mr. Lee Croddy.
Objection, Your Honor, not a question.
Sorry, may I rephrase?
You may. The objection will be sustained, so go ahead.
Can you please tell the court of how you know the defendant, Mr. Lee Croddy?
I originally started watching his videos as I became more of a fan. I would interact with him occasionally on social media.
What was your initial interest in Mr. Lee Croddy's videos fueled by?
I initially had to research online politics for my job, then I became a fan quickly after.
When was your first encounter with Mr. Lee Croddy?
My first direct encounter with Mr. Lee Croddy was in March 2019. Over Twitter, when Lee created a non-public group chat with myself and some of other Lee's followers.
Now, I'm going to ask you some questions specifically about the group chat. When invited to a group chat by Mr. Lee Croddy with Ms. Remy Montoya, what was usually the primary topics of these conversations?
We discuss Lee's videos, sometimes receive sneak peeks of new upcoming content, and overall just vent passionately about many issues occurring in our world.
Within these group chats, what was the overall tone of the conversations?
Very passionate. Conversations would get heated, get frustrated, but it was always stress relieving, and we went about our lives and issues.
Ms. O'Neill, did you ever commit a crime or felony influenced by the group chat?
No.
Objection, Your Honor, leading.
Overruled. Go ahead, you can answer the question.
No, of course not. I never thought of doing anything illegal. That never came to mind. We would just vent passionately and convey our frustrations to each other.
After the conversations that had taken place on February 12th, what was your impression?
Lee is always very passionate about things, but we would never take it too seriously in these group chats, as it was a safe haven for us.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Well, the question didn't call for speculation, but the answer did. So I'll ask you to rephrase the question, please.
After the,
From there.
I apologize, may I proceed?
You may.
After the conversations that had taken place on February 12th, what was your impression of Mr. Croddy's words?
Impression of Mr. Lee Croddy's words was that he was just very passionate about this upcoming issue and video.
Did anyone ever confide in or discuss any plans for illegal actions within these created group chats?
Never. Nobody.
including Remy Montoya, did not mention or confide in plans with me or any other group chat members to my knowledge.
Have you met Mr. Lee Croddy or Miss Remy Montoya in person?
Yes, there was a meet and greet that took place on. I actually saw both of them there. I talked to Remy briefly, but I was barely able to get any conversation with her.
At this meet and greet, what kind of behavior were you noticing from Mr. Lee Croddy and Miss Remy Montoya?
Lee Croddy was acting like his typical self, making conversations with other fans, and just being really amazing. Remy Montoya seemed in a panic, was very nervous, and of course, Lee tried to calm her down, but it really didn't seem to help.
Objection, Your Honor. Expert witness on the word "in a panic."
I instruct the witness to rephrase.
All right. So the objection will be sustained, and you can go ahead and re-ask any part of that question that you want to focus her on.
Thank you. I believe we can just move on to the next question.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. When you left the meet and greet, was there anyone left?
When I left the event, Lee, Remy, and a few fans were still there.
Thank you, Ms. Zuri O'Neill. That will be all, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Cross-examination of this witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Ms. O'Neill.
Good evening.
Let's talk about your political involvement. You feel like the government is trying to cover things up, correct?
Yes, but that is to my personal opinion.
And you admired Lee for their skepticism of the government, isn't that right?
Yes, I admired him as I was a fan.
And in your opinion, Lee Croddy's words are meant to be taken literally and at face value, isn't that right?
Passionately, but yes.
So, yes, so Lee Croddy's words are meant to be taken literally and at face value.
Oftentimes we say things out of frustration, but no.
Ms. O'Neill, in your witness statement, it specifically says that in your opinion, you believe Lee Croddy's words are meant to be taken literally and at face value. Isn't that true?
It is true, but we say things out of passion.
So are you telling the truth in your witness statement, or are you telling the truth now?
Both, yes.
So could you please answer the question, just a yes or no? Lee Croddy's words, are they meant to be taken literally and at face value?
Yes.
Thank you. Now I'd like to direct the witness's attention to the group chat. The name and address of Drew Marshak were visible in the sneak peek sent to the group chat. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And in the final video, Lee directly calls for the viewers to demand information from Drew Marshak, right?
Yes, but doesn't elicit anything illegally.
And moving on to the meet and greet on Saturday. Miss O'Neill, you saw Remy Montoya at the meet and greet, isn't that right?
Correct.
You saw Remy talking to Lee at the meet and greet, correct?
Yes.
And Remy had a briefcase with her?
Yes.
And you saw Lee fiercely grip Remy by her shoulders while in conversation, isn't that right?
Yes, but not fiercely.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, any redirect for this witness?
No, Your Honor.
All right, next witness, please.
Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Jes Beaart to the stand.
All right, thank
Dr. Jes Beaart, can you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the FAST rules on mock trial competition?
I do.
Please say your name and spell your last for the record.
Jes Beaart, B-E-A-R-T.
What do you do for a living?
I'm sorry, you cut out. Can you please repeat that?
I apologize. What do you do for a living?
I work as an associate professor of sociology at Beechwood University.
What are some of your professional achievements?
I have a PhD in sociology, and I've written a number of articles for various publications about social media, especially in quarantine, and how they effectively move their movements online.
And how did you become involved in the case?
I was asked to join this case to give my expertise on the presence of groupthink.
And how thoroughly did you review this case?
I very thoroughly reviewed this case. I looked at the various communications between Mr. Croddy, Ms. Montoya, and other members of the group chat.
In your professional opinion, would you say that Lee's actions are typical for activist music towards Remy? Are Lee's actions towards Remy typical for activist movements?
Yes, Lee's actions are very typical for activist movements. Lee relays information out to the public, however, to
spread information. However, he himself does not encourage his members to take violent actions or anything. He is an influencer. However, he does not mean to incite violence or anything like that.
Could you describe Remy's fixation with Mr. Lee Croddy?
Yes, Remy is an obsessed fan, and Remy would act independently of Lee, even for their shared political goals. An example of this is how Remy took the initiative to steal the documents and rob Mr. Marshak, independent of Lee.
And based on your previous knowledge on the behavior of groupthink, would Lee's actions inspire conduct?
Again, Lee sees himself as a catalyst for the movement, but not the leader of an organization or a participant in any actions to obtain documents or anything like that.
Is there one generation that is more present of activist groups on social media today?
Yes, as digital natives, Generation Z is particularly active in activist movements. Generation Z is more susceptible to being ardent fans and really involving themselves in these activist movements and taking independent action. Remy Montoya is a member of Generation Z, and I believe that he acted similarly to how his whole generation would act in this case.
And Dr. Kai Chavez mentions the idea of groupthink. Do you think this is involved in this case?
Objection, Your Honor. This question is leading because of a suggestive insinuation.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You can answer the question.
With all respect to my colleague, Dr. Kai Chavez, I completely disagree with her in this case. I believe groupthink was not present because after reviewing the online group chats, because only Remy Montoya took independent action to obtain the documents, while no other members of the group chat participated in this.
Thank you. That will be all.
Thank you.
All right, cross-examination of this witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Dr. Beaart.
Good evening.
You compared the defendant with Greta Thunberg. Is that correct?
I did in my witness statement, yes.
Yes. And you state that Thunberg, like the defendant, is a catalyst for action rather than someone who directs the actions of others. Is that true?
Yes, completely.
However, it is Dr. Chavez's position that the defendant spurred a toxic environment, correct?
That is Dr. Kai Chavez's position. However, I completely disagree with that.
And Dr. Chavez's stance is that this environment was responsible for Ms. Montoya's actions, right?
That is true. Again, I disagree with that in my professional opinion.
So your belief is that Remy was acting independently of the defendant when she broke into Marshak's house. Is that
yes,
true?
Completely. Lee was not there, and Remy took her own initiative to commit that crime.
Thank you, Dr. Beaart. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Dr. Beaart, do you have what has been previously entered into evidence as Exhibit C?
May I please find it in my printed papers?
Of course, Dr.
Did you say B as in boy or C as in cat?
C as in cat, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Yes, I have it with me.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of the WhatsApp conversation between Lee Croddy and Remy Montoya?
Well, I believe I can't determine that because I was not a participant in these conversations.
Dr. Beaart, on the top of Exhibit C, it says February 14th WhatsApp conversation between Lee Croddy and Remy Montoya.
Oh, I'm not denying its authenticity. I'm just saying I myself probably cannot certify that.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Beaart. Dr. Beaart, could you please read lines 29 through 31 of Exhibit C?
29 through 31, you said?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I know you do, but we need those documents, Remy, really need them. You need to get into that house tomorrow.
Oh, Dr. Beaart, I believe you are mistaken. You're reading from the outdated case packet. Actually, the most updated case packet omits the phrase really need them.
Oh, my apologies.
Let's move on. So the defendant sent a message telling Remy to go get into Marshak's house and get her confidential documents. Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
And personally instructing someone to get into another person's house is direct action. Is it not, Dr. Beaart?
In some ways, yes. However, Remy still is an adult, and she could still make her own decisions.
So just to clarify, you say yes, it is direct action, Dr. Beaart.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right, thank you. Any follow-up here?
Sorry, could you repeat yourself?
All right, so we're on redirect, is that correct?
Yes, there's no redirect.
All right, thank you. Is
Thank
this
you.
the last witness for the defense then?
The defense will call one more witness,
All right,
Mr.
thank you.
Croddy.
Of course. Whenever you're ready, ma'am.
Can you explain what you do for a living?
Hang on one second. Do we have the witness?
Oh, I don't think we see the witness.
stand yet?
Can you hear us, Mr. Croddy?
Yes, I apologize. I was having technical issues.
You're okay. Can you explain what you do for a living?
Your Honor, has the witness been sworn in yet?
Not quite yet. Give us just one moment with the bailiff. There you
I
go.
apologize.
It's okay.
Okay.
Mr. Lee Croddy, can you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts, rules, and law competition?
I do.
Please state your name and spell your last for the record.
I am Lee Croddy, Croddy, Croddy.
Okay.
Now,
Can you explain what you do for a living?
I am a freelance political journalist. I host the YouTube show The Right Choices RCN. As of March 12th, 2019, I was averaging 3 million to 3.5 million views per month.
Okay. Can you describe your relationship with Mr. Remy Montoya or Mrs. Remy Montoya?
I know Remy, but we are not close. I interact with a lot of my fans and I admire them all. Remy and I mainly interacted through the group chat, though Remy had attended a couple of my meet and greets in the past. I don't remember much of Remy, but I do remember Remy once shared in a group chat how she shoved someone who called our movement a bunch of lunatics.
And can you describe the nature of the group chat Remy Montoya was in?
My manager has always thought it is a good idea for promotion if I interact with my fans and make them feel special. It could seriously boost my reputation. I added Remy, along with some other fans, to a group chat to let them see sneak peeks of my videos and interact more.
Can you describe the day of the meet and greet?
I organized a meet and greet at a local cafe, and I noticed Remy was extremely frantic and anxious. I was never extremely close with her, but her behavior was a legitimate concern to me. I've always been extremely grateful to my fans, so I felt that I had to do something for her. I ended up letting her crash in one of my guest beds.
And this was previously moved into evidence, but do you recognize this briefcase? Exhibit B.
That is the outlandish briefcase Remy brought the day of the meet and greet. I thought Remy was just trying to amuse me. It looked like a prop at first.
And then could you also elaborate on Exhibit C? Specifically the last lines where you say, "Thank you, good luck tomorrow, don't do anything I wouldn't do."
What I meant was, figuratively speaking, I wanted to break into this wall of secrets put up by government. The people deserve honesty. At no point did I intend for anyone to physically break into Marshak's home or steal anything from Marshak. In the group chat, we often encourage each other to take individual action, but to be honest, no one ever really did. It was basically a form of venting for stress relief.
Thank you, that will be all.
All right, thank you. Cross-examination for this witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Mr. Croddy.
Good evening.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Mr. Croddy, do you have a copy of Exhibit C on hand?
I do.
Are you familiar with Exhibit C?
Yes, this is the WhatsApp chat between me and Miss Montoya.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of your WhatsApp conversation with Remy Montoya as you remember it?
Yes.
On page 50, lines 29 through 31, or Exhibit C, you sent a text to Remy Montoya that read, "I know you do, but we need those documents, Remy. You really need to get into that house tomorrow. Is that correct?
Yes, I did, but I meant it as I never thought she would break in. I meant it as to go and knock on the door and to try and receive the document.
Mr. Croddy, on February 15th, the day of your meet and greet, several of your fans were present in Beacon Hills, correct?
Yes,
And yet, you specifically chose Remy Montoya to ask if she could get the documents. Is that right?
I did, yes.
And you did this knowing that in the past, Ms. Montoya admitted to being violent towards someone she saw as an opposition to your movement. Is that right?
Yes.
In fact, you admired Ms. Montoya for this show of dedication to your movement, right?
I admired the fact that she stood up for our movement. I did not admire the fact about how aggressive she was.
But you do acknowledge that the action was a violent one, right?
Yes, it was violent.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Mr. Croddy, do you have a copy of Exhibit B on hand?
Yes.
Are you familiar with Exhibit B?
Yes, this is my Twitter group chat with a few of my fans.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of that Twitter group chat as you remember it?
Yes.
Your Honor, permission to move Exhibit B into evidence?
Any objection?
None.
Exhibit B will be admitted.
Mr. Croddy, on page 49, lines 19 through 21 of the updated case packet, it's transcribed that you sent a message reading, "Don't worry, I'm still doing some digging. The person who wrote these reports was stupid enough to leave their name on it. I'll march right up to Marshak and demand the information." Is that correct?
Yes.
And to clarify, the person you were referring to in that message was Agent Drew Marshak, correct?
Yes.
2 minutes remaining.
And in the sneak peek of the video you sent to this group chat on February 12th, Drew Marshak's full name and address were visible. Is that right?
Yes.
And Mr. Croddy, do you have a copy of Exhibit A on hand?
I do.
Mr. Croddy, are you familiar with Exhibit A?
I am. This was the briefcase that Miss Montoya had.
And is it a fair and accurate representation of the briefcase as you remember it?
Yes.
Mr. Croddy, the briefcase has the name D. Marshak on it, does it not?
It does.
And it also has a logo for the California Department of Justice, right?
Yes.
And during your car ride with Remy after the meet and greet, you saw that same briefcase and thought it was official looking, did you not?
I did.
Mr. Croddy, you have said that after
1
seeing
minute.
Montoya was in at the meet and greet, you were genuinely concerned for her well-being, were you not?
I was.
And in general, would you say that you value your fans more as people than as income sources?
I do. I value them as individual people, not my followers.
And yet, you completed your professional role of socializing with fans even after you deemed Ms. Montoya as visibly shaken. Is that right?
Yes, it is. I thought that it would be more important to finish and give Miss Montoya all the
seconds.
Understood. And do you trust the advice of your agent, Erin Sullivan?
I do.
And rather than seeking professional help from Ms. Montoya, as your agent, Erin Sullivan, advised you to do, you took her straight back to your home, correct?
Yes, it almost looked like she was having a panic attack, so I took her back to rest.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right, thank you. Any redirect?
None.
All right, thank you very much. So that concludes the defense presentation of evidence. Am I correct?
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you very much. So with respect to where we are right now, before a verdict is rendered, would the teams like to consult and confer with their attorney and teacher coaches regarding any trial irregularities? If so, let's do so now.
Oh, Your Honor, I believe there are still closing statements to be made.
I apologize. There most certainly is. All right, let's go to the closing statements. For the prosecution, who will be making the closing statement?
I will be making the closing statement, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Feng, whenever you're ready.
When Remy Montoya punched and robbed Drew Marshak on February 15th, 2020, she was not acting alone. While it is true that she had committed a crime, she did so at the behest of a manipulator, a puppet master, if you will. Your Honor, it was the defendant who fueled the session, singled her out for the task, and convinced the young fan to carry out an act that she will regret for the rest of her life. Opposing counsel claims that this case is like a snowball turning into an avalanche. If that is true, Your Honor, it was Lee Croddy who created the snowball and Lee Croddy who created the conditions necessary for the avalanche in the first place. Now, expert witness Dr. Kai Chavez has revealed that since the very beginning, Lee used the group chats between him and his followers to perpetuate a toxic environment of groupthink, using inflammatory rhetoric and angry rants to create a hostile mentality among his fans. Your Honor, it was through this process of conformity and toxicity that the defendant ensured Remy's absolute loyalty to his cause. Now, opposing counsel claims that only Remy Montoya robbed and assaulted Drew Marshak, but this can be explained by the simple fact that Remy Montoya was the only one from the group chat who was directly ordered through private messages by Lee Croddy to get the documents. That was why she was the only one who took action. Now, Calcrim 400 and 401 explain that the defendant is aiding and abetting a crime when they know that the perpetrator meant to commit a crime and still consciously help them do so. Your Honor, it is beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did just that. First, the defendant urgently pressured Remy to get the documents through private messages. We need those documents, Remy. We really need you to get into that house. Your Honor, these aren't the words of a kind or sympathetic person. These are the words of a puppet master pressuring a follower into committing a crime. When the defendant was the one that indoctrinated Remy to his cause before ordering her to get the documents at all costs, it is clear that he knew exactly what Remy planned to do. Even Zuri O'Neill of the defense admits that Lee Croddy's words are meant to be taken literally and at face value. Your Honor, this wasn't just another publicity stunt by the defendant. If he said he needed the documents, that means he needed the documents. When he said he needed Remy to get into Drew's house, he meant exactly that. Second, Officer Bird reported how just days before, the defendant had given Remy the name and address of Drew Marshak, clear proof of aiding and abetting. Not only did the pubmaster pressure Remy into committing a crime, he also gave her all the tools needed to do so. Your Honor, it is no coincidence that out of all of his fans, the defendant singled out Remy Montoya, whom he knew for a fact had access to the address of Drew Marshak and whom he knew had a history of violent behavior to his cause to carry out the crime. Now, opposing counsel claims that Lee Croddy was never at Miss Marshak's house, but this completely ignores the charges levied against the defendant, aiding and abetting an accessory, which are not dependent at all on Lee actually carrying out the original crime itself. Now, Calcrim 440 furthers that the defendant can be charged with accessory if they knew that the perpetrator had committed a crime and still aided them in order for them to avoid arrest. Once again, Your Honor, it is beyond reasonable doubt that the defendant did just that. Remy Montoya herself has revealed that after robbing and assaulting Drew Marshak, she told the defendant that she had gotten the documents and that she had a run-in with Miss Marshak. Having just sent Remy Montoya to steal classified government documents, the defendant knew for a fact that Remy had broken the law. Even on the car ride back, Remy exclaimed that the government briefcase was not a prop. Two instances that ensure the defendant knew exactly what Remy had done. Now, opposing counsel claims that Remy never told the defendant that she had punched Drew Marshak. But as proven before, the defendant specifically singled out Remy Montoya, an obsessed fan with a history of violent behavior, to get the documents. Even if Lee was not aware of Remy's specific violent actions, he was still aware of the fact that Remy had broken the law by stealing government documents. This much is clear. Instead of turning her into the police, however, or getting her professional help, as suggested by Erin Sullivan, the defendant instead took Remy into the back entrance of his house. This, Your Honor, clearly meets the second condition of accessory. Housing a known criminal and taking her in through a back entrance is clear indication that the defendant was aiding the perpetrator in order for her to avoid arrest. At the end of the day, it is beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant knew Remy meant to commit a crime, helped them do so, and aided them afterward. Like a puppet master pulling the strings, the defendant ensured Remy's unwavering loyalty through a toxic groupthink environment before pressuring her to commit a crime while giving her all the information needed to do so. After the act, the defendant, with full knowledge of what had just transpired, took Remy to his house and hid them there by using a back entrance. Your Honor, the defendant has transformed Remy Montoya from a hopeful young fan into a criminal. The defendant has caused both physical and psychological pain to the victim, Drew Marshak. In the name of justice for the people, the state of California respectfully requests a verdict of guilty on both charges. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Feng. Who's
May I
making
begin?
closing statement for the defense?
That would be me.
All right, whenever you're ready, ma'am.
The notion of a puppet master paints Remy Montoya as a helpless object. Remy Montoya is a living, breathing 21-year-old female. Your Honor, this is a case of a crazed fangirl desperately trying to bring down her idol within her own fall. What initially was a juvenile idolization has become a gross obsession, just as a snowball becomes an avalanche. The defense has laid out the evidence. Lee is a political journalist whose fearlessness prompts him to ask the questions that nobody else will. Mr. Croddy's charisma ropes in millions of supporters, and like any other public figure, this includes obsessive fans that are unable to use common sense. Remy Montoya falls under this category. Every once in a while, Mr. Croddy and Remy would have spotty conversations through a group chat on WhatsApp. Remy occasionally scoring tickets to meet and greets. As an intellectual, Lee speaks with an articulate, imaginative vocabulary. What Remy failed to understand on February 15th was the juvenile lesson of metaphors. On February 15th, Remy burst into a meet and greet, flustered and anxious. What was she doing prior? Assaulting government officials on her own time with her own agenda. Lee was unaware of this fact. When Remy arrived, Lee saw a troubled fan in need of help. Graciously, he opened up his home to Remy in hopes of her settling down. The next morning, Lee woke up to Remy's arrest in her living room. Today, we've heard from fellow group chat member Zuri O'Neill, who spoke of Mr. Croddy's true character, a passionate, motivated journalist, what she described as harmless conversation. These were the words she used to describe the group chat. If Mr. Croddy's rhetoric was so convincing, and this notion of groupthink was so powerful, why, out of 5 people in a group chat, was Remy Montoya the only one to commit the crimes? We then heard from our next witness, Dr. Jes Beaart, who received her PhD in sociology and is an expert in her field. Dr. Beaart came to the conclusion that although Remy felt influenced by Mr. Croddy, the girl acted alone in her crimes. She determined in her professional opinion that if Remy had never met Lee, it would not have been long before Remy instigated another one of these violent attacks. Mr. Erin Sullivan, a person who works with Lee every day, explained how the nature of these group chats was purely business, a mere tactic to use. And lastly, the defendant himself, Mr. Lee Croddy, took the stand. He told this courtroom about his passions as a journalist and how his kindness was taken for granted by an obsessive and unstable Remy Montoya. On February 15th, Lee channeled the kindness of his heart and provided true emotional support for what seemed like a time of need for a follower. Would a guilty man take the stand and offer the complete transparency and honesty that we saw today and every day for Mr. Croddy? Your Honor, I ask of you today to trust the facts of this case rather than the baseless claims coming from the prosecution. The prosecution attempted to tell a story, and nothing but that, a story, a narrative. Their accusations insulted this courtroom, and a so-called expert who has never even met Lee attempted to paint a malicious character. That couldn't be farther from the truth. Today, the prosecution has failed to make the claim that Lee Croddy was in any way, shape, or form involved in Remy Montoya's crimes. The defense asks you to acquit Mr. Lee Croddy, and frankly, the evidence requires you to. Thank you. That will be all.
All right, thank you. Rebuttal, sir?
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel champions the testimony of Jes Beaart, the thesis that Remy acts independently of Lee, but there are a couple of glaring problems. First of all, opposing counsel claims that Dr. Beaart is here to assess groupthink, but she has literally no expertise on groupthink. In fact, Kai Chavez, the only expert on groupthink here today, has already stated that Lee created a toxic environment that led to Remy being indoctrinated to Lee's cause. That much is clear. Additionally, Lee Croddy still personally instructed Remy to go into Marshak's house and to get the documents. Dr. Beaart concedes in cross-examination that this was direct action, and therefore Lee Croddy was responsible for Remy's actions. Even then, opposing counsel claims that Lee did not mean for Remy to commit a crime, but as stated before, the defendant singled out Remy Montoya due to having the address of Ms. Marshak and having a history of violent behavior. It is clear that Lee's intent from the start was to use Remy to commit a crime. In the name of justice for the people, the state of California asks for a verdict of guilty.
All right, thank you, sir. In the competition, the defense also gets to make a rebuttal. Is that correct? All right, ma'am.
This notion that the prosecution keeps pushing that Lee is a manipulative adult preying on this child is completely false. Lee is a political journalist. He works on the internet. He's endowed the same rights that we all are, creative freedom. What people do with this creative freedom can be interpreted however they please. The defense asks you to acquit Mr. Lee Croddy of all crimes. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And thanks everybody for your hard work. Let's take that 60-second break now at this point. So you'll each have an opportunity to consult with your coaches and your teachers. So our 60 seconds will start now on any trial irregularities.
Thirty seconds. Stop.
All right, turning first to the prosecution.
No irregularities, Your Honor.
All right, for the prosecution, who's speaking, please?
I am, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much. No irregularities, ma'am?
None, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much. For the defense?
There were no irregularities.
All right, thank you very much. All right, now I'm going to switch my view. So I have the gallery view. Give me 1 second. All right, can we, I want to remind our scorers for them to please complete their score sheets and their award nominations to the extent that they have any. I believe I understood this instruction from the brief that the judges had before the competition, that the teams are no longer being asked to identify an MVP from the opposing team. Is that correct? Anybody can let me know the answer to that. Alex, perhaps you know the answer to that?
Your Honor, this is Alex Calero. I don't know the answer to that, but I will find out as soon as I can.
All right, thank you. I do want to turn now to having some comments after I make my verdict. So I'm going to make my verdict, then I'm going to go to comments from myself and from our scorekeepers. And the scorekeepers, they have not introduced themselves, so they'll turn on their cameras at that time, introduce themselves. I'm going to ask that everybody in total try to keep their comments to 10 minutes. So the court has reached a verdict, and the court finds for the people that the people have met their burden of proof and finds the defendant guilty on both counts. So that verdict is independent of the scorekeeping and how you all move on in this competition. So I'm going to ask that the scorekeepers please turn on your camera.